All right, that's Phyllis again, and this is going to be a story about a black snake. Again, it was at my grandmother's. Now, I guess you figured out by now all the adventures took place at my grandmother's. I mean, they had a lot of land, and they had a big garden, and they had cows, and a mule, and pigs, and chickens, and even an apple orchard, and pear trees, and all that kind of thing. So it was totally different than living our life in the city when we lived in Newport News, Virginia. It was, that was right in town, and people didn't have gardens, and you had a next door neighbor that was really right next door. And out in the country, you'd have to, the nearest neighbor was a distance away. So we were at my grandmother's for the summer, and I'm going to guess and say I was about maybe 8-10 years old. And my grandmother fixed huge breakfast for us when we were there. I'm not sure she cooked that way every morning, but when we were there, that's the kind of breakfast she fixed. It would be biscuits, sausage, bacon, scrambled eggs. She fixed my grandfather poached eggs. Some people wanted fried eggs, and she would fix grits sometimes, but a lot of times it would be hash browns. And sometimes people wanted toast instead of biscuits. She'd fix that. And of course, we always had the homemade jelly and the gravy. I think they call it black eye gravy, where when you cooked like country ham that was real salty, then you would just pour some coffee in. You pour off some of the grease, and then that coating that would get in the pan, you would pour hot coffee over that and make this. Maybe they call it sockeye gravy. I can't remember what they called it. But anyway, you would put a little bit of that over your eggs or even over a biscuit, and it was delicious. So, and of course, us kids, we always had to drink milk, and the grown-ups drank coffee. So anyway, this was a morning when my grandmother, I think it was a Saturday morning actually, and my grandmother had fixed a great big breakfast, and so we got up, and as soon as we came in the kitchen, there was some commotion going on, and so we could tell this wasn't the normal breakfast thing. And Granddaddy wasn't there, and my uncle, I think, was over, one of my uncles, and they were out back. We could hear them talking out in the back. And so anyway, we sat down, had our breakfast, and everything was kind of muffled. They weren't really doing a lot of talking. And so after we finished breakfast, they said, well, you can come out and see the snake now. And so we walked out and went to the old barn, which was the largest barn. And of course, my granddaddy and uncle were out there, and there was this huge snake. They measured him. He was 6 foot long, and he was about this big around. And if you could imagine, he was about this big around, and then he had 4 big, huge humps on his back. And of course, they had cut his tail off, and they told us to go up and look. And so we went up and looked, and I could see there was a little bitty in the snake's mouth. They had cut its head off, but you could still see the bitty in its mouth, and you could see the humps. And what had happened was, of course, Grandma had gotten some bitties. She used to order them from Sears Roebuck, and they'd actually come in a box in the mail. And I don't know how they did all that, but they would come that way, and she would keep them on the back porch till they got a little bigger and keep a light out there so they would stay warm, and then she would transfer them to one side of the barn. There was a little area there, and that's what she had done with these bitties because they'd gotten up a little bigger. And every morning when she would go out there to give them fresh water and everything, several of them would be missing. And so this particular morning, she went out there, and the big black snake was in there eating the bitties. And what had happened was, I guess he probably heard her coming, and because he had eaten so many of the bitties, at this point he couldn't get back through the hole that he came in through. And so, of course, she got my granddad out there real quick, and he used a shovel and chopped his head off. But then he drug him out. So that kind of solved the mystery of what was happening to all the little bitties that Grandma had. Once the snake kept eating them, and of course he kept getting bigger, and then finally the day came when he was too big because he had those big humps in his back where the biddy hadn't been dissolved yet, and he just couldn't get back out that hole. So my grandmother fixed the hole, and Granddaddy, so that no more snakes could get in. But they had drug the snake out to right in front of the barn door so we could all see it. And my uncle, I do remember now, it was my Uncle Connie that was there that morning. And so they were telling us that, we said, well, what are you going to do with the snake? Because he was big. I mean, you're going to have to dig a big hole to bury him. And they said, oh, no, what we're going to do is hang him on the fence post because we need rain. So then we learned what that old wives' tale was. If you hang a snake, dead snake, on a fence post after you kill it, then it'll rain. So that's what they did. So it started raining the very next day. It rained the next day and the next day. And for 11 days it rained. Sometimes it would be harder, sometimes it would be lighter, but for the next 11 days, at some point during the day, it rained. Now, this was about, I'm going to say, maybe June, maybe the 1st of June, and my grandparents had planted the garden, and it was up pretty, like the corn was up maybe that high, and the beans, everything had come up. And they always had the garden in a different place every year on their property. I'm not sure why they did that, but it would always be in this particular summer, it was down in the field next to the barn, on the right side of the barn, away from the pastures. And down at the bottom of that field was where the creek was. Now there was some a whole bunch of trees and forest there, but it still went straight down to the creek. So after it rained for 11 days, Grandma came in and said, we're going to have to replant the garden. And we said, well, why? And she said, because the garden washed down to the creek. So we all went out there and looked at it. You couldn't even tell the garden had been plowed. It was just smooth mud. And you could see some things growing down there at the edge of the forest before you got to the creek. There was some corn coming up and stuff like that. And we had had so much rain that it just washed everything right down that hill. So, of course, we were wide-eyed and in wonderment because of all the rain, because apparently what they told us about hanging the snake, dead snake, on a fence post to get rain, it worked. It worked really well. Now, the truth was we were probably under a low-pressure system that maybe got stalled over our area, but we believe the snake thing really worked. So anyway, that's my story on the black snake. See you next time.